It was me. I was the one. Before you hear the rest of this story, you need to know that. You need to know who I was. I was the one who, in front of our whole town at the crowded St. Jude's annual parish festival, cornered my own sister, Sarah, and screamed at her, my voice raw with a fury I'd been nursing for years, that her faith was nothing more than a crutch for the weak. I was the one who, blinded by a grief that had festered into a cold, hard rage, saw the procession coming. I saw the painted wooden statue of the Virgin Mary on the float, her hands outstretched in a gesture of peace that, to me, felt like a mockery. And I was the one who snatched that small statue from its place of honor, held it high for every parishioner, every neighbor, every child to see, and then hurled it with all the strength in my 58-year-old body onto the hot, black asphalt. I can still hear the sound it made. Not a loud crash, but a hollow, splintering crack that was immediately swallowed by the crowd's stunned silence, a silence that then broke into a collective gasp of pure horror. That was me. My name is Richard, and for most of my life, I was a man at war with God. I am a retired architect. I spent 40 years of my life designing buildings, structures built on logic, on physics, on blueprints, where every line had a purpose and every angle was calculated. My world was one of concrete, steel, and glass. It was tangible. It was real. If I couldn't measure it, test it, or prove it, it simply didn't exist. And God, well, God was the grandest, most unprovable thing of all. My atheism wasn't just a casual disbelief. It was a shield I had forged in the hottest fires of grief. It was my armor against a God I held personally responsible for taking my wife, Ellen, after a brutal 5-year fight with cancer. I watched the woman I loved more than life itself wither away, and all the prayers from my devout sister, all the well wishes from her church friends, all of it amounted to nothing. It was just noise in a silent, empty universe. After she was gone, my bitterness became a personal crusade. My sister, Sarah, was the complete opposite. She was, and still is, a cornerstone of the church community. Her faith is as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. It's quiet, unshakable, and serene. And I hated it. I truly, deeply hated it. Every time I saw her finding comfort in her rosary beads, or peace in a hymn, I felt it as a personal insult to Ellen's memory. How could she believe in a benevolent God after what we had all witnessed? To me, her faith wasn't just a difference of opinion. It was a delusion, a dangerous lie people told themselves to avoid the harsh, cold reality of life. And I made sure she knew it. Our family gatherings became minefields. I'd mock her for going to Mass, for lighting candles, for believing in what I called ancient fairy tales. I was cruel, I was condescending, and I was relentless. I saw it as my duty to wake her up from her fantasy. That day at the festival was the culmination of it all. It was a perfect, sunny Saturday in late September. The air smelled of grilled hot dogs and popcorn. Children were laughing, their faces painted. It was a picture of wholesome community, and it made my skin crawl. I saw Sarah by the main tent, helping an elderly woman into a chair, a gentle smile on her face, and something inside me just snapped. All the years of pain, of watching my wife suffer, of feeling utterly alone in my grief while everyone else offered empty platitudes and prayers, it all came boiling to the surface. I walked straight up to her, ignoring the people around us. I didn't lower my voice. I wanted everyone to hear. I told her that her God was a monster or an imbecile, and that her devotion was an embarrassment. Her face, bless her heart, didn't register anger, just a deep, profound sadness for me. And that made me even angrier. That's when I saw the procession float being prepared. It was simple, decorated with flowers from people's gardens, and there in the center was that statue. It was probably only 2 feet tall, carved from wood, painted in gentle blues and whites. An object of love and devotion for so many. But in that moment, I saw it as the symbol of everything I had lost, the very face of the indifferent heaven that had ignored my pleas. Destroying it wasn't just an attack on a piece of wood. It was my declaration of war. It was me, screaming into the void, trying to make the universe feel even a fraction of the pain I felt. The act itself was a blur of pure rage, but the aftermath is burned into my memory with perfect clarity. The shattered pieces of wood and paint scattered across the asphalt, the look on my daughter Sophia's face, a mixture of shame and disbelief. And my sister Sarah, after the shock wore off, kneeling down, not with anger, but with tears in her eyes, as she began to gather every single splinter, as if they were the bones of a loved one. I had done more than break a statue. I had shattered my family, and in my pride, I felt a grim satisfaction. I had finally made them see. I had shown them what their precious faith was worth. I had no idea that I was the one who was about to be shown something. I had no idea that one of those tiny, broken pieces held a miracle that would shatter my entire world. If this story is already speaking to you, if you've ever felt lost or angry and don't know why, please consider subscribing to this channel and liking this video. It truly helps more than you know, and I'd genuinely love to know where my story is reaching. If you feel comfortable, please leave a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. It helps me feel a little less alone in sharing this. Now, let me tell you what happened next. After the festival, a new kind of silence descended upon my life. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I had once curated in my minimalist home, a silence I had mistaken for strength. No, this was a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the sound of unanswered phone calls to my sister Sarah. It was the clipped, polite distance in my daughter Sophia's voice when she did pick up, a wall of forced civility where warmth used to be. She still brought my grandson Leo to visit once a week, but the visits were strained. She'd sit on the edge of my designer sofa, as if ready to flee at any moment, her eyes never quite meeting mine. And little Leo, my sweet, silent grandson, would play quietly on the floor, lost in his own world, a world I was no longer truly a part of. I had become a ghost in my own family. In my arrogance, I had thought destroying that statue was a victory. In reality, I had only succeeded in demolishing the last remaining bridges to the people I loved. I was an island, and the waters were rising. I told myself I didn't care. I was Richard, the architect, the man of logic. I had my books, my blueprints, my meticulously ordered life. I didn't need their fairy tales or their pity. I filled my days with routine. I'd wake at 6, read the paper, work on sketches for projects I'd never build, and in the evening, I'd pour a glass of expensive scotch and watch the news, sneering at the world's descent into irrationality. I was in control. My house was my fortress, its clean lines and hard surfaces a reflection of my own mind. Everything had its place. Everything was predictable, until one Tuesday afternoon in late October. The air was crisp. The autumn light slanted through the large picture window in my living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I was standing by my drafting table, looking over some old plans of a library I'd designed 20 years prior. That's when it happened. It started subtly. A slight tingling in the fingers of my left hand, as if it had fallen asleep. I shook it out, annoyed at the distraction. Then, a wave of dizziness washed over me, so profound that the entire room seemed to tilt on its axis. The precise right-angled world I had built for myself suddenly warped, the floorboards seeming to ripple like water. I gripped the edge of the drafting table, my knuckles white. I told myself it was vertigo. Maybe I'd stood up too quickly. I was a rational man. There was always a rational explanation. But then my left leg buckled. It wasn't a weakness. It was an absence. It simply ceased to be under my command. The connection between my brain and my limb had been severed. My body, the one thing I thought I had dominion over, was betraying me. I crashed to the floor. The impact was jarring. my head hitting the polished hardwood with a sickening thud. I lay there, stunned, the left side of my body feeling like a foreign object, a dead weight attached to my torso. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of confusion. I tried to push myself up with my right arm, but the effort was immense. I was a ship whose rudder had been snapped off in a storm. My phone was on the coffee table, perhaps 10 feet away. It might as well have been on the moon. I tried to call out, to shout for help, but the words caught in my throat, emerging as a garbled, slurred groan. The architect, the man whose words had once cut his own sister to the quick in a crowded park, could no longer form a single, coherent syllable. Lying on the floor of my silent, perfect house, the universe I had so confidently declared empty and indifferent suddenly felt malevolent. My atheism offered me nothing. I could diagnose myself: a stroke, almost certainly, a cerebral infarction, a blockage of blood to the brain. I could recite the clinical terms, but the words were just labels for the terror that was now consuming me. There was no one to pray to, no one to bargain with. My belief system, my shield of logic, was as useful as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. It provided no comfort, no hope, only a cold clinical summary of my own demise. The silence I had once weaponized against my sister's faith was now my tormentor. It was an active, crushing presence, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing, the frantic, useless thumping of my heart. Hours passed. The afternoon sun gave way to the long shadows of evening, and then to darkness. The fear of dying began to transform into something even worse. The fear of dying alone, of being found days later by my daughter, my body cold on the floor. My final act on this earth wouldn't be the completion of a grand building or a legacy of reason. It would be the memory of a bitter, hate-filled old man who shattered a little wooden statue in a fit of rage. The image of Sarah kneeling on the asphalt, carefully gathering the broken pieces, flashed in my mind. The shame I saw on Sophia's face. In that moment, stripped of my strength, my voice, and my pride, I understood true and absolute failure. I had built a life on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in. I was at the absolute bottom, a place so dark and so deep, I was certain no light could ever penetrate it. Lying there, I understood what it meant to be truly broken. If you're finding value in this journey from pride to brokenness, please take a moment to hit the like button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what happened when I finally left that hospital room. It was in that abyss, pinned to my own floor by the dead weight of my body and my pride, that time ceased to have meaning. The darkness in the room was absolute, a perfect match for the darkness in my soul. I was no longer fighting, I was simply waiting. Waiting for my heart to stop, for my brain to finally flicker out, for the end of a life I had so thoroughly poisoned with my own bitterness. My thoughts, disjointed and slow, drifted. I saw my wife Ellen's face, not as she was in the end, but as she was when we first met. Her smile so bright it could have lit up a city. And the memory was an agony, a reminder of the love I had betrayed by becoming this creature of hate. I saw my sister Sarah, on her knees on the asphalt, her face a mask of sorrow, not for the broken wood, but for her broken brother. And for the first time I felt a pang of shame so sharp, so profound, it was a physical pain in my chest. That's when the quality of the darkness began to change. It wasn't a light turning on. It was more like the darkness itself was thinning, becoming less oppressive. A soft luminescence began to gather in the corner of the room, near the window where the evening shadows had been the deepest. It was a faint, gentle blue, the color of a twilight sky just after the sun has vanished. My rational mind, what was left of it, screamed at me. Stroke-induced hallucination. Anoxia. The brain playing tricks as it dies. I tried to cling to those explanations, my last vestiges of the man I used to be. But the feeling that accompanied the light, it wasn't a trick. It was the most real thing I had ever experienced. The light didn't form a distinct shape, but it pulsed with a presence. It was calm, it was patient, and it was undeniably feminine. I felt seen. Not just my paralyzed body on the floor, but all of me. My rage, my grief, my pathetic, stubborn pride. All of it laid bare under a gaze that held no judgment. There was no booming voice from the heavens, no angelic choir, just this profound, silent understanding. And in this silence I felt a sorrow that wasn't my own. It was a sorrow for me. It was the feeling of a mother watching her child thrash and scream in a self-inflicted tantrum, her heart breaking not with anger, but with a deep, bottomless compassion. The mercy I felt flowing from that light was overwhelming. It was a wave that washed over me, cleansing the filth of years of accumulated hatred. I, who had shown no mercy, who had mocked the very idea of it, was being drowned in it, and I began to weep. A single, hot tear traced a path from my good eye down my temple and into my hair. It wasn't a tear of fear or self-pity. It was a tear of pure, shattering gratitude for a forgiveness I had never asked for and certainly did not deserve. I didn't know how long it lasted. Seconds, minutes, an eternity. Then, as gently as it had appeared, the blue light faded and the oppressive darkness of the room returned. But it was different now. The malevolence was gone. The silence was no longer my enemy. I was still trapped, still helpless, but I was no longer alone. I closed my eye, and for the first time since Ellen died, I surrendered. Not to the void, but to that presence. Whatever happened next, I was ready. And then, I heard it. A sound that broke the spell, that crashed through the supernatural peace with its beautiful, ordinary reality. The sound of a key sliding into the front door lock. A click. The door creaked open. "Dad, you home? I brought by some of Leo's drawings for you." It was Sophia. Her voice, laced with a familiar, weary caution. She must have had a key made after the festival, worried about me. The light in the hallway flicked on, a harsh yellow blade cutting into my sanctuary of darkness. "Dad?" Her voice was closer now, a note of confusion, then rising panic. "Dad? Where are you?" And then she stepped into the living room and saw me. The gasp she let out was almost identical to the one I'd heard from the crowd at the festival, a sound of pure shock and horror. But this time, it was for me. Her shadow fell over me as she rushed to my side, her phone already in her hand, her voice trembling as she dialed 911. The paramedics, the questions, the flashing lights, it all happened in a blur. But as they lifted me onto the gurney, my one good eye found my daughter's face. She was crying, her hand clutching my own, and in her eyes, I didn't see the shame and disappointment I had put there. I saw only love. A concrete, desperate, beautiful love. The light had brought me mercy, but it had also sent me my daughter. That moment on the floor changed everything, but the proof I couldn't deny was yet to come. If you're still with me on this journey, please hit that like button and be sure to turn on notifications, because you need to hear what happened when I finally saw my grandson again. The hospital was a temple of logic, and for a few days, I found comfort in that. It was a world I understood. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a predictable metronome. The crisp white sheets were a blank slate. The doctors spoke my language. Data, prognosis, neurological deficits. They showed me the scans of my brain, pointing to the tiny, dark spot where the flow of blood had been interrupted. A clot. A simple, physical, explainable thing. My left side was weak, my speech was slightly slurred, but with intensive physical therapy, they said, I could expect to make a significant recovery. It was all a matter of rewiring the brain's pathways. It was a problem of engineering, of structure, and I, Richard the architect, could appreciate that. My mind, My fortress of reason went to work immediately, trying to contain the one thing that didn't fit into their clean clinical narrative, the memory of the blue light. It was an aberration, a phantom limb of the soul. During the day, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the brisk efficiency of the nursing staff, I could almost convince myself it was a product of the stroke itself. Anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. A common phenomenon I read online for the dying brain to produce hallucinations, visions of light, feelings of peace. It was textbook neurology. A final, beautiful, meaningless electrical storm before the system shut down. I clung to that explanation like a man clinging to a piece of driftwood in a raging sea. It was my blueprint for sanity. I would rebuild my life on the foundation of that rational explanation. The blue light was a symptom, nothing more. But the nights belonged to the blue light. When the hospital corridors grew quiet, and the only sound was the gentle hiss of an oxygen machine down the hall, my logical framework would crumble. Sleep was not an escape. It was an ambush. I would dream not of buildings or blueprints, but of splintered wood. In my dreams, I was back at the festival, but I wasn't the one throwing the statue. I was kneeling on the hot asphalt alongside my sister Sarah. I could feel the grit of the pavement under my knees, the sharp edges of the painted fragments in my hands. And as Sarah and I gathered the pieces, each one would begin to glow with that same soft, benevolent blue light I had seen in my living room. The light wasn't coming from an external source. It was radiating from the brokenness itself. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, the phantom pain of a splinter in my palm feeling more real than the IV in my arm. The shame was a physical presence, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I would lie awake in the pre-dawn grayness and see my life with a horrifying new clarity. I saw myself at a dozen Christmas dinners, a smirk on my face, as I made a clever, cutting remark about Sarah's imaginary friend. I heard my own voice, dripping with condescension, explaining to my daughter Sophia why religion was the opiate of the masses, a tool of control. I remembered every rosary I'd called superstitious beads, every prayer I'd labeled a waste of breath. I had always seen myself as the champion of truth, the brave warrior of reason standing against a tide of comforting lies. But in the quiet honesty of those hospital nights, I saw myself for what I truly was, a bully. A man so hollowed out by his own pain that his only recourse was to try and hollow out everyone else. I hadn't been defending truth. I had been weaponizing my grief. And the target was always the people who loved me most. One afternoon, after a grueling session of physical therapy where I'd spent an hour trying to relearn how to hold a fork, Sophia came to visit. She was trying so hard to be cheerful, telling me about Leo's day at kindergarten, but I could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, "if you get restless or just need a quiet place to sit that isn't this room, the hospital chapel is on the second floor. It's, always open." She said it so casually, as if suggesting I go to the cafeteria for a change of scenery. But we both knew what she was saying. It was an olive branch, a quiet acknowledgement that something in me might be changing. The old Richard would have scoffed. He would have made a sarcastic comment about looking for a cure in a storybook. But the old Richard was a ghost. I just nodded. "Thanks, honey." The next day I did it. Hooked up to my rolling IV pole, my left leg dragging slightly, I made the long, slow journey down the sterile hallway, past the nurses' station, to the elevator. The entire trip felt illicit, like I was a spy crossing into enemy territory. The chapel was a small, unassuming room. No grand stained glass, just simple wooden pews, a modest altar, and a plain, unadorned cross on the wall. The air was still, and smelled faintly of floor polish and something else, something like peace. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, my heart pounding. I felt like a complete and utter fraud. What right did I have to be here? I, the man who had publicly desecrated a sacred image. I was a vandal in a holy place. I expected to be struck by lightning, but nothing happened. There was only the silence. Slowly I shuffled to the back pew and lowered myself onto the hard wood. I sat there, staring at the cross. I didn't know what to do. I had no words for prayer. All the words I knew were for arguing, for dissecting, for dismissing. I tried to think, to rationalize my presence there. The force observing. An architectural study. A sociological experiment. But it was a lie. I was there because I was broken, and for the first time in my life I had nowhere else to go. I closed my eyes, and the image from my dream flooded my mind. The glowing blue pieces of the statue. My act of ultimate destruction. My sister's act of ultimate love. My throat tightened. A hot, stinging pressure built behind my eyes. I, who had not cried at my own wife's funeral, felt the dam of my pride finally begin to crack. I didn't speak the words aloud. I didn't even know if they were for me or for something else. But from the deepest, most shattered part of my being, a thought formed, clearer than any I had ever had. I am so sorry. It wasn't an apology for a single act. It was an apology for a lifetime. This part of my journey, this battle inside the walls of my own mind, was the hardest part. If you're finding a piece of your own story in mine, please hit the like button and make sure you've activated the notification bell. You need to be here for what happened when I finally went home. Going home was the strangest journey of my life. I left the hospital in a wheelchair, a temporary concession to my weakened left side, pushed by my daughter Sophia. The man who had entered those automatic doors was an architect of arrogance, a man who believed he had the blueprint for the entire universe. The man who left was a ruin. But for the first time, I felt like a ruin that the light could get into. The crisp autumn air felt different on my skin. The colors of the turning leaves seemed more vibrant, almost impossibly so. It was as if a gray film had been scraped from my eyes, and I was seeing the world as it truly was for the very first time. The news of my change of heart, as some called it, spread through our small town with the speed of gossip. It was a bizarre cocktail of pity and morbid curiosity. Old friends from my firm would stop by, ostensibly to check on my health, but really to probe, to try and fit my experience into a neat, logical box. My friend Mark, another architect, sat in my living room, in the very spot where I had collapsed, and gently tried to reason with me. "Richard," he said, his voice laced with concern, "it was a massive stroke. The brain, deprived of oxygen, can create incredibly vivid hallucinations. It's a well-documented neurological event, that blue light. It was a beautiful, but ultimately meaningless, firing of synapses." I could hear my old self in his words, the same condescending certainty I had used on my sister for decades. And I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince him. I just looked at him, and with a calm I had never known before, I said, "Mark, I designed buildings for 40 years. I know what's real and what isn't. And that light was the most real thing that has ever happened to me." He left confused, shaking his head, certain I'd lost my mind along with the full use of my left leg. Others weren't so kind. I'd hear the whispers at the grocery store. "That's him, the one who smashed the statue. Now he says he's seen God. Probably just trying to get his family to forgive him." Some people avoided my gaze altogether, as if my hypocrisy was a contagion. I had been a monster to them, and now I was a fool. In a way, they were right. I was a fool. A fool who had spent his entire life staring at the floor, meticulously measuring the tiles, while a magnificent cathedral ceiling soared above his head, completely unnoticed. But through it all, there was Sarah. She never once said, "I told you so." She just started coming over, not to preach, but to sit with me. She'd bring soup. We'd sit in comfortable silence. One day, she brought a small, simple wooden rosary. She didn't hand it to me or tell me to use it. She just left it on the end table by my chair. For days, I just looked at it. The beads I had once called superstitious trinkets. Then, one afternoon, my hand, the good one, reached out and picked it up. The wood was smooth and cool. I didn't know the prayers, not really. But I held it, and in holding it, I felt like I was holding the hand of a friend in the dark. I started going to St. Jude's with her. I'd sit in the very back pew, a ghost in the house I had tried to burn down. I would look at the new statue of Mary they had placed near the altar. It was smaller than the one I had destroyed, simpler, and when I looked at her painted face, I felt no rage. I felt only the echo of that blue light, that overwhelming, undeserved mercy. I saw the face of a mother who had watched her own son be broken, and who, because of that, understood the heart of every broken person who came to her. A year passed. A year of slow, painful work in physical therapy, rebuilding the strength in my body and in my soul, rebuilding the bridges I had bombed. As the next St. Jude's annual parish festival approached, a knot of dread and determination formed in my stomach. I knew what I had to do. I spoke to Father Michael, and on that Saturday, 1 year to the day after my public act of hate, he called me up to the small wooden stage set up on the lawn. I walked with a cane now, my limp a permanent reminder of my fall. The crowd went silent. I could see the same faces that had watched me in horror a year ago. I looked out and found my sister Sarah and my daughter Sophia standing together. My grandson Leo was holding Sophia's hand. I cleared my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. A year ago, I began, my voice shaking slightly. I stood on this very ground, a man full of pride and rage. I thought I was strong. I thought my certainty was a fortress. I paused, taking a breath, and in that pride, I committed an act of violence. I took something that was precious to this community, a symbol of a mother's love, and I shattered it on the asphalt. I saw people nodding, remembering. The shame was still there, but it no longer owned me. What I didn't know, I continued, my voice growing stronger, is that I was the one who was truly shattered, and it took being broken completely, lying paralyzed on my own floor, unable to move or speak, for me to finally see. I looked directly at my sister. I am so sorry, Sarah, for every cruel word, for every moment I mocked the faith that was your strength. I then turned my gaze to my daughter. Sophia, I am sorry for the shame I caused you. Finally, I addressed the crowd. I can't explain what happened to me with blueprints or physics. I can only tell you that in my darkest, most hopeless moment, I was shown a mercy I had spent a lifetime insisting did not exist. The very love that I rejected, the grace symbolized in the statue I destroyed, was the only thing that came down to the floor to meet me. It didn't just save my life. It gave me a life worth living. I stepped back from the microphone, tears streaming down my face, and the silence wasn't stunned this time. It was thoughtful. Then, from the front, a single person began to clap. It was my sister. Then, Sophia. And soon, the entire crowd joined in, a sound not of victory, but of welcome, of forgiveness. My journey isn't over. It's just beginning. It wasn't about changing a religion. It was about my heart being changed. It was about realizing that the opposite of faith isn't doubt. It's pride. It's the certainty that you have all the answers. I have no answers now. I only have this story, this gratitude, and this peace that passes all understanding. This journey from rage to grace is the most important blueprint I will ever follow. If this story has resonated with you, if you believe in the power of mercy to rebuild a broken life, please show your support by liking this video and turning on notifications so we can continue this journey together. And I genuinely need to hear from you. In the comments below, please tell me about a time you were shown a kindness or a forgiveness you felt you didn't earn. Your stories are a testament to that same light, and they remind me and everyone who reads them that no one is ever too broken to be remade. Thank you.